it into is if we've got an existing document, it's already been created, and I want to go through and review this information. Again, I'm going to come back into my DocXtools tab. I'm going to click on my cross references button, and remember, clicking on the cross references button is only going to open the task pane. We have to click the scan to populate the pane with that set of results. But again, once the scan completes, what we've accomplished is compiling those two lists. All of our outline numbering that we can see on the right side, and all of our candidates for cross-referencing on the left side. And in this task pane, a couple of tips that I like to call out again, and some of you might be aware of this, but I prefer to sort this list alphanumerically. So by clicking on the numbers found, it's going to sort my list alphanumerically so I can group items together, so I can see all of my section 2.2s, and I can quickly review these items and make sure that these are all the reference to my section 2.2 that I want to link to. And I can confirm that in a basis of orders. So I can now take all of these references to that location, hold my shift key to multi-select, and now this is going to be the same drag and drop, but this time I'm going from the left side of my pane to the right side of my pane. Again, the difference is if I'm doing this in real time, I'm taking the numbered item reference and actually dragging it into my document at cursor. In this case, I'm finding all of my type text and linking based on a drag and drop from my candidate to my target within my task pane. Now, a couple of things will happen. You'll notice that my document is going to change from type text to a cross-reference field. You'll notice that now a checkbox appears indicating to me that these are cross-reference fields and not type text any longer. The reason why I like to recommend using this DocXtools task pane is because it gives you meticulous control over the information that we review. Sometimes we see information like this, section 155 of some act that we are referencing in a different document. This is a call out to other information, but it's not internalized to this document. This is calling an external document. And so while this looks like a potential candidate, we know that it is in fact not a candidate for cross-referencing. So in this case, I'm just going to remove that from my list. But this way I can control and review all of my items, validate that these are accurate items to be cross-referenced, and then build that link very easily within my task pane workflow. Now, one of the things that we will pick up in this task pane is our error reference source not found. And so this is something that can manifest in documents. I'm sure many of you have seen items like this before. So this error reference source not found can come up. And again, it's telling me that this was a previous link to something happened. But now we can review this and make that determination easily within my task pane of how I want to link that to the appropriate item. Some quick reminders about this. Again, if I've inadvertently linked something and I dragged it to the wrong target, as long as I don't refresh the results of my task pane, it's going to keep this information available to us as just a guide to a reminder of what that previously said. So if I accidentally dragged to the wrong location, I can simply right-click on that item, remove the link, and it will revert it back to our original text. Sometimes that happens as we're moving quickly. I take an item like section 2.7 and actually drag it onto 2.6. So in my document, I can validate that it says 2.6, but in my task pane, it's 2.7. I made a mistake. That was an accident. Again, you have the ability to right-click, remove that link, revert it back to text. You notice there is no check in the box now because it is back to text, and drag that back to the appropriate target in my task pane. Okay. So these are the two big scenarios that I would talk about for leveraging the DocXtools cross-references task pane. if you're going to be building cross-references on the fly, dragging it to the document, or if your entire document is typed text and you want to go through and evaluate these items, DocXtools cross-references is going to be a viable solution for building those cross-references. And I would still argue that it's going to be much quicker than if you were manually going through this line by line and using native words cross-references dialog box to build a reference. This process with the task pane will expedite your workflow and save you a tremendous amount of time. But if you need to save even more time, that's where I would talk about DocXtools Companion. So again, I'm just going to use a different document to illustrate DocXtools Companion. And again, what it's going to do is it is automatically going to go through and scan for reference items, candidates to be linked. And not only is it going to go through and scan for those items, but it is actually going to create cross-reference links for me automatically once it finds those items. So in this case, I'm going to come to my Litera tab where I've got my DocXtools Companion group located, and I'm going to click on my cross-references button in this scenario. Now in this case, we will present to you a slightly different dialog box to let you know that we are doing some handling of the document, and you can see that some things are happening. And before anything happens, in certain documents, not in every document, but in certain documents, you might see this prompt that comes up. And this says that there are 5 items that we want to draw your attention to for additional review. Do you want us to mark that with a comment? Again, you have the option to opt out and click no. In this scenario, I always like to click yes and get as much information as I can. So when I click yes, I'm going to mark that with comments, and then we're going to go through and process the document. And again, depending on the length of your document and how many references you have, this number is going to change. The number of actions that we execute is going to be different for every document that you work on, but the end result is going to be the same. So essentially what I'm left with is now links to these areas in my document. And so I can use my navigation to browse these links and look at and review this information. Now, one of the things that you might notice is that's different about DocXtools Companion versus DocXtools is that DocXtools Companion is only linking the number and not the entire section and number. The reason why is in certain scenarios, you'll notice that this has sections. And so we are using intelligent logic to be able to, we don't want to remove the word sections and replace it with section 2.1 and 2.2. We want to say sections. So we only link the number in that case, but there are other areas in my document where we will build out the full path of section 2.1 or 2.2. Now, once that's been done, the software is also going to call out anomalies to us. So in this case, it's telling me that we found something that looks like a cross-reference in this document, but we don't know what it should be. And so again, we've marked it with a comment to just, again, draw your attention to that. Now in this scenario, you can do one of two things. Because there are a few items, you can either, and I'm going to just close my revisions pane for a moment. You can have one of two options. You can either go into DocXtools and open your cross-references pane, run the scan, and link that item. Again, but if it's only for 1 or 2 items, in that case, that's where I might recommend that you use native word to review this. But what this is telling me is that there is no section 1.12 in my document, and I'm making a reference to that. So why is there no section 1.12 in my document? And that is the bigger question, is that we have this, and this paragraph doesn't exist. It might be that that paragraph got deleted. It might be that I copied and pasted from another area, and I haven't added that yet. But again, the point remains is that we've detected something, and it's going to use some logic to call that to your attention. So I know that I'm going through this a little quickly, trying to explain the differences between the two. With DocXtools Companion, everything is very automatic. It takes all of the processing and it just compiles and does that for you through its algorithm and engine. With DocXtools, it's a little bit of a slower process, but it gives you greater control and overview on the references that you're building. And so that's why I said there really is no right or wrong to using either of these features. I think it's going to come down to the task at hand. You know, how are you building these references? Is it as you are authoring and doing this on the fly? Is it because something happened where you had to repurpose your document, you know, turn all those links to static text, and now you need to relink them? And so again, the scenario is going to dictate what feature you use. I think both of them are very powerful, very practical in terms of time savings, but ultimately it's going to come down to you, the user, and the type of document that you're working on. And so I think that is going to conclude my spiel on the two different processes for building cross-references. I've seen the questions dialogue light up a few times, so I think we've got a couple questions coming in. We'll take a quick pause for just a moment, review some of these questions, and then we'll get those addressed. So give me just a moment, and I'll be right back to answer some of those questions. Okay, so a lot of questions are coming in. I don't know if we will get a chance to answer all of them on the session right now, but we will address those questions to you personally, and we will get answers to those questions. So one of the questions that came in, someone said, when you said refresh, do you mean to scan again? And yes, so I had said refresh the task pane. That is referring to when I'm in my cross-references pane. I said refresh. It is just a rescan of the document. So sorry for using some different language there, but I do want to make that clear that if I have my results open, I manipulate my document in any way, if that means adding or removing content, a rescan of the document will refresh or update the results within that task pane. Another question that came in, it says, for existing documents, it said it would be best to use Companion, and then, let's see, and then review with the DocXtools task pane scan. So that's a really good point. So if you've got a document like this, you can certainly interact and use both of those features. So going back to my example, I use DocXtools Companion to build my links. So I can always then come into DocXtools, run my scan, and evaluate for information. And in here, I can look at this information and filter based on my existing references that were created, and then the references that are incomplete or not filtered. And so, again, based on your scan with DocXtools, some of these items might be what we call false positive. It looks like a potential for a cross-reference, but we really know that this is just embedded or inline numbering. So in cases like this, we don't necessarily need to create a reference to these because this is actually an embedded number. So I can review these items, and again, if I don't think these are cross-references, I can use my shift key to select, right-click, remove them, and then just focus on the items that do need to get linked. So I have the ability to go through and review some of this information. And I think that's a good point. You can certainly interact with both features using DocXtools Companion to do an initial sweep, and then go into your DocXtools task pane to do a further analysis. So another question that came up, it says, how do I change to add the word section to 2.1 if it's omitted when I run DocXtools Companion? So this is an interesting question that came up. So in this case here, for example, this says sections 2.1, and it is really should be section 2.1. This is a weird example that was authored in the document. And so this is a good question to ask. So instead of saying sections 2.1, I want the word section to be part of my 2.1 reference. So there are a couple ways you can do this. So what we are doing is when we're building these references, we are actually doing a suppression of non-delimiter characters. I know that's fancy jargon, but there are a couple ways you can fix that. In this case, if I have this item on screen, I can simply right-click on this item, and I'm going to go into my edit field. And in my edit field, you're going to see this little checkbox, suppress all non-delimiter characters, and it's checked. If I uncheck that, you'll get the word section, and now in my document, I'm just going to make a manual edit to remove that word sections because it was incorrect. And now the word section is part of my cross-reference field. So behind the scenes, we are doing some manipulation. If I go back up to my example here, we are automating that ability to suppress those non-delimiter characters behind the scenes because we don't want to manipulate the document incorrectly. For whatever reason, if you wanted it to say section 2.1 and section 2.2, I would remove that text, and I could do it by, again, right-clicking on my field, going to edit field, and unchecking that box and hitting OK. Or if you ran a scan on your document and section 2.2 came up, you can do the same thing. You can right-click and just turn off that suppress all non-delimiter characters, and that is a way that you can manipulate your cross-reference field to either say the word section and include it, or exclude it and not have the word section included in that field. Those are a really good question. I know we're getting close to the end of the session. I've seen a few more questions come in. I apologize that we can't get to all of your questions right now. We will do some follow-up to respond to any questions that have been asked. So thank you very much for your time on today's session. Just a review or reminder, these were the past webinars that we've done over the last few months. As Allison said, you can access these webinars by going to our website, and that is
Litera.com/webinars.
And you can, find all of our information out on our website. If you have any questions about continued training, you can always email us at training@litera.com. We really appreciate you joining today's webinar. We hope this was educational to kind of give you a compare contrast of the differences and nuances between DocXtools cross-references and DocXtools Companion cross-references feature.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. All right, thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.